This episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Mercaris. The holiday season is the perfect time to slow down and spend time with your loved ones. Mercaris takes the stress out of finding market intelligence so that you can focus on the important things. Mercaris has free resources exclusively for growers. Make the best business decisions with Mercaris' organic and non-GMO pricing reports, delivered directly to you for free. Visit mercaris.com/farmer to sign up today and get started.
This is Ryan Koory, the Director of Economics at Mercaris, here with your monthly market update for the U.S. organic sector. As we're sitting here in the middle of December, getting ready to wrap up the calendar year, overall the markets look pretty quiet. We're not seeing a great deal of activity or a great deal of surprises in pretty much anywhere that we look. If we kind of look at maybe some of your winter planting, the pace there seems to be pretty good. We've had some pretty heavy snows in some parts of the United States, but that doesn't seem to have impacted planting. It seems to have gotten in ahead of that okay. And we're really too early to start talking about any kind of winter kill issues. If we look at some of our other facets, talking about maybe what we see going on with livestock, again, I think the story there is pretty steady as she goes. If we look at that federally inspected broiler slaughter number reported by the USDA, over November we came in at about 4 million head, essentially 4.1 million head slaughtered over the month, which is down just a little bit from last year, partially due to the fact that November of this year had one fewer slaughter day and the pace was just a little bit off. Looking at that federally inspected turkey number, the organic turkey slaughter rate continues to remain phenomenal. Over November, we reached about 431,000 head, up about 300% year over year. And really with that, it doesn't look like it was a Thanksgiving phenomenon or November-specific phenomenon. If we look at the first week of December, we saw that daily slaughter rate reach about 20,000 head per day, which was up 340% year over year. So organic turkey slaughter just continues to chug along at a pretty phenomenal rate. And then looking at your cage-free egg layer inventories, we see organic layer inventories remained at about 17.1 million head through November, or up about 6% year over year. Real quickly, kind of looking at the picture of imports, with November, we have the close of the first quarter of our marketing year. And with that, there's a couple of things that are somewhat interesting to note. First being the pace of organic corn imports, which we expected to be slower this year, have actually been slower than even we anticipated. Through the first quarter of this marketing year, total organic imports were down pretty substantially, and it's really down due to a slower pace from Argentina. Through this first quarter, we were down about 67% year over year in terms of the pace of imports. And that's really interesting because one phenomenon that we had looked for over this year was Argentina to continue to expand its exports to the United States and capture more market share. And so far, we really haven't seen that at all. And it's too early to call the game on that, but with corn prices being lower and harvest looking good, I think we've touched on this before. It's likely we're just starting to see those imports continue to be pushed out of the market like we saw in the past couple of years. Soybeans look somewhat similar. Organic soybean imports were down also through the first quarter of this year, basically down about 69% year over year. And there, again, we're talking about Argentina. We're just importing fewer from Argentina, but also Russia. And over this past year, we've talked about how we saw Russia really take off and the question of how much more Russia could expand its exports to the United States. But both Argentina and Russia have fallen off hard. And so overall, organic soybean imports are down pretty well through the first quarter of this year. And then looking at organic soybean meal is the exception. And we continue to see the pace of imports, particularly from India, they just remain phenomenal. And this may be an element of why we're seeing whole bean imports remain depressed as they have been for the past 3 months. Over November, we saw the overall level of organic soybean meal imports reach almost 39,000 metric tons, or up about 160% year over year. And this is really the third consecutive month that we've seen the pace of these imports just remain so heroic relative to where they've been in the past. We had looked for overall soybean meal imports to be a little bit higher this year. However, the pace over the first quarter of this marketing year has definitely exceeded our expectations, and so it's something to keep an eye on as we get into this next year to see if this pace remains and if it starts to translate into some downward pressure on soybean prices in the United States. And so kind of wrapping up generally where the market sits as we're closing out the 2020 calendar year. In December, over the first 2 weeks ending December 5th, the price for organic feed-grade corn delivered to grain elevators in the U.S. Corn Belt was at about $6.40 per bushel, which is pretty much even with what we were talking about in November. The market for organic feed-grade wheat remains really depressed. Really since the start of November, the contracting activity we've observed in the market has been too low for us to really put together a cohesive price that we can put back out in the market. However, the prices that we have seen remain pretty consistent with that $6.40 per bushel price that we've seen for organic corn. And then soybeans, kind of continuing the narrative of steady as the market goes, the 2-week period ending December 5th, again, we saw that soybean price come in at $19.70 per bushel, which is pretty well even with where we were at the start of November. So we continue to remain right around that just a little bit below that $20 per bushel mark.
So Ryan, just as you mentioned, steady as she goes in the market, not a whole lot happening right now, but just looking at moving into 2021, something that maybe we ought to keep an eye on, but just a question for you would be, conventional corn right now is hovering right around the $4 range, depending on where delivery's at and the local markets. And with organic corn right around that $6.40 mark, at what point do we start worrying about current organic farmers pulling the plug on organic acres and just going back conventional, maybe not worth the headache? Or at what point do we have to start worrying about that, or are you not quite there yet?
Yeah, whenever I think about that question there, and I've answered that question to a few different folks lately, the thing that I talk about whenever I answer that question is the kind of the leading indicator of that trend there would be if you start to see new applications drop off. And we're at the part of the year now where new organic certification applications aren't really coming in yet. That won't really happen until we start getting into the later part of winter or early spring. And so that's, like I said, that's a question that I've had a few folks ask me lately, and it's a very important one. Whenever organic corn's at $6.40 per bushel, that definitely dampens the economic incentive. So we're really going to be watching that. One bright spot has been, soybean prices have held up, which helps some profitability, and it'll be interesting to see if soybean prices remain elevated like they are, if that changes the economics of an organic farm, and maybe we see first-year crops. Historically, as you come out of transition, the first crop that you pull is organic corn because it's historically paid best. Well, if soybeans start to take that lead, maybe we'll see a change in transition approach, in terms of farm management. Maybe you'll start to see more soybeans come out as your first-year crop. But, I think the big thing there is if we think about what's going on with these prices and what may be driving people out of the market due to profitability, what it comes down to really is it comes back around to consumer demand. Why we see corn prices falling off while soybean prices are remaining strong is simply because we've expanded organic corn acres in the United States faster than we've grown demand. And we haven't done that with soybeans. Whenever we look at that supply paradigm, we've talked about it before, within the U.S., we still import about 80% of our organic soybean needs, as with corn, it's more like 25%. And so whenever you have, a couple of years of really good organic corn crops, and, this past year has been really great. And the year before, even though we had some serious production issues, everybody remembers how rough 2019 was, we still had a fantastic organic corn crop overall. And it's putting downward pressure on those prices. And the reason it puts downward pressure on those prices is the consumer demand side isn't growing as fast as those acres. And that's what's pushing down on prices and pushing down on profitability. And if you think about that consumer demand side and how it can lead back into growing the industry, the OTA puts out their annual estimates in terms of how much organic food sales are in the United States. And if I remember correctly, they estimated it at about $50 billion for 2019. Well, $50 billion, if you include both retail or both grocery store and restaurant sales, that's only about, I think, 3% of total food sales in the United States, which means you could triple organic sales in the United States. If you don't really think about anything else, in terms of growth, but just tripling the consumer demand, that gives you another $100 billion worth of organic demand within the United States. Something as simple as that, the impact that could have on organic profitability and growing organic farms is pretty remarkable if you think about it.
I think you hit on a topic that is pretty interesting there, with 3% of overall food sales being organic, and I think that will continue to grow, and that's partially what drives farmers to look at organic as an option, not just the economic incentive. But in the meantime, certainly economics do have to drive the farm, and as far as what we're looking at with the corn prices where they're at right now, I'll just use a local example of working with a feed mill in northern Indiana. That community down there has grown their poultry facilities, large poultry facilities, whether it's broiler or layer barns, significantly, quite rapidly, at least in terms of that local community. And that would be a high user of corn and soy. But I assume that is not quite enough. Is that production being shifted from other parts of the country, or are the acres just growing faster than that poultry demand can keep up?
Yeah, whenever you look at and this is maybe me taking some of my words back, but whenever you look at the growth of organic poultry in the United States, it's been fantastic for the industry, particularly for organic corn farmers for a long period, because it definitely added some juice to the corn price and helped expand acres. One of the perils with that, though, is, when you look at organic poultry rations, they remain predominantly corn and soybeans. And so you look at some of your organic producers, like Bell and Evans is set to, I believe, double their production by the end of this year, which would be great for demand, don't get me wrong, but whenever you continue to double demand for corn and soybeans, but it doesn't relate back into growing demand for other rotational crops, it has limitations in terms of how much benefit it can do for organic field crop farmers. And so, if you think about some of these things in terms of demand, it's not just growing demand itself, but growing demand in a way that is supportive of organic farms. If we go back and we talk about soybeans and how we import about 80% of our soybeans, well, those imports are primarily used for feeding organic poultry. If we were able to come up with a situation in which we put more rotational crops like peas into our poultry rations, and bring that demand back in the United States. Because, to be completely frank, there's no way we can domestically grow enough organic soybeans with the current level of production. Agronomically, it's challenging. If you raised organic soybean acres that much, you would just be planting more corn and more oats and everything else, too, that already have somewhat challenging markets. So, whenever I think about this, I always think about, how can we take these different areas of livestock and different areas of demand growth and really work with them in a way that is more in line with organic crop production to kind of create a more holistic system. And there's definitely producers out there that do that. If you look at one person I like to talk about is New Country Organics. They produce a fair amount of poultry, but they have no corn and no soy feed rations that they use for their organic poultry. And so, it creates a different kind of growth paradigm within their company, and it translates back into farmer profitability in a different way. And so it's a complicated situation, and we definitely want to support all areas of growth, but we also kind of want to check how the industry is growing against itself to make sure that it's growing holistically and in line with organic production overall.
And that just feeds into the overall principle behind organics, and being able, as a crop farmer, being able to have that rotation just allows, the whole principle behind organics of healthy soil, healthy crops, healthy animals, and healthy food for healthy people. That rotation is key in that. But as you mentioned, just as far as soybeans go, and attempting and that price staying up and potential for farmers to grow that organically, that's a tough one. I know as far as consulting with farmers on and advising on what to do, I certainly have advised before that get some organic corn under your belt before you start touching soybeans. It's a tough one, just as far as weed control, and that crop doesn't shade out as quick as corn does, and you really got to be on top of it. And it's going to be tough to fulfill that demand for sure domestically.
Yeah, and it's one of those areas that has, protein as a part of the feed ration in general has just grown so much over the past 4 years because American consumers are ratcheting up their demand for organic proteins. Organic chickens and organic eggs and organic turkey. It's a hot commodity. Consumers are demanding it, and that's a great thing for the industry. It's just making sure that whenever we satisfy that demand, we're doing it in a way that's consistent with organic farming overall.
Well, that's great, Ryan. I really appreciate. This might have been a quick report today, but it's a lot. As markets currently, month over month, are steady as she goes, but certainly a lot to look forward to as we turn the calendar, and stuff to keep our eye on. And there's a lot of positives out there, I think. And I appreciate your time and hope you have a great Christmas.
You too, Brian. Thanks a lot.